For eons, Satan has been portrayed as the model of wickedness. It was Satan who was cast down to the earth, Satan who was the corrupter of mankind, Satan who, otherwise coined as the adversary to God, became the antithesis of all that was holy. Satan, as the devil, would become the archetype of sin itself. It was the devil that encouraged corruption. It was the devil that brought about calamity. And in some cases, it would be the devil that facilitated our bad choices. The old idiom, "the devil made me do it," springs to mind. Perhaps a convenient perspective that one might adopt to vindicate themself of accountability. Satan has therefore been blamed for a lot of things over the years. His hatred for humanity saw him incite some of, if not all, the wars that have transpired over human history. His salacious appetite for debauchery saw him seduce and fornicate with women during the periods of witchcraft trials, and in some interpretations it was Satan himself who took the guise of a serpent and tempted Eve into sampling from the tree of knowledge, thus condemning all of humanity with the original sin. But what if I told you that Satan wasn't to blame, and that there was no devil per se, but actually a more complicated, perhaps even more wicked entity, who not only once raped and corrupted humanity by teaching them forbidden knowledge, but was, in the same vein as Satan, also an angel too. His name was Azazel. In the ancient apocalyptic work of the Book of Enoch, we are shown candid moments that transpire in the world before the flood. How there was once a thriving race of humanity that existed, at least in one point in time, in relative harmony. This would coincide with the biblical account in Genesis, where humanity, in this pre-flood world, would begin to increase in number, but that as they did multiply, so did their tendency towards sin, until the whole world is corrupted and humanity as a whole is described as a great wickedness. The biblical account makes no effort to explain why or how these once peaceful humans became so depraved and nefarious, but that the magnitude of their villainous ways was so tremendous that it warranted their extinction via the flood. 1 Enoch attempts to answer these questions, telling us that humanity's corruption was not necessarily their fault, but rather the actions of rebellious angels, known as Watchers, led by the angel Semyaza, who, after becoming aware of the beauty of the mortal women on the earth, descended from the heavens to know them. As a result of this illicit affair between angels and humans, the women gave birth to monstrous creatures known as the Nephilim, who proceed to run riot on the earth and further its desecration. But the angels do not leave after they have violated the mortal women, but rather proceed to teach humanity the forbidden knowledge that God had not ordained them to learn. This included herbalism, the cutting of roots, the study of plants, charms and enchantments, old magic, astrology and the constellations. Almost overnight, humanity became aware of the once hidden knowledge that had once been under their noses the whole time, and it is with such knowledge that they are enabled to sin and transgress in ways unheard of before then. However, the most detrimental source of forbidden knowledge came not from the leader of the Watcher Semyaza, but rather one of those in his cohort, the angel Azazel. We are told, "And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids and all kinds of costly stones and all colouring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways." The 1 Enoch narrative leads us to believe that whilst the knowledge taught by Semyaza and the other angels was forbidden, it wasn't necessarily something that would utterly corrupt mankind should they have learned it. However, It is the knowledge taught by the angel Azazel that becomes the smoking gun. For we are told, "And the whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin." By this verse, Azazel becomes the originator of sin. Before this, we are under the impression that the world was a peaceful place, that humanity coexisted in relative tranquility, and that there was no conflict or warfare, because there was no means by which humanity could engage in such an affair. Azazel is then positioned as the one who gave them this means. It was he who gave them swords, knives, and shields, and taught them how to use them against each other. Additionally, you'll find it interesting, no doubt, that the verse doesn't mention any of the other angels and their contributions of forbidden knowledge, but rather distinguishes Azazel as the only one guilty of corruption, and the one whom all sin ought to be ascribed to. One might see the parallels between the likes of 1 Enoch's Azazel and the biblical Lucifer. Both are angels, both take on the role of antagonists in their individual pursuits, and both ultimately end up shouldering the blame for their transgressions. Indeed, whilst Azazel wasn't the only angel to intrude upon mankind, and whilst Lucifer wasn't the only angel to rebel against God, both narratives still identify them as either the instigators or the main culprits. Thus, they are delineated as the worst of the worst. That isn't to say that their respective companies aren't punished also. Azazel and his fellow watchers are bound and cast into an underground prison known as Dudale, whilst Lucifer and his angels are cast out of heaven and down to the earth. Indeed, their punishments certainly mirror each other, with the imagery portraying both as fallen angels who in their banishment become something detested and vilified. You might actually be tempted to conflate the two entities of Lucifer and Azazel, or Satan and Azazel. But given the confusing chronology of Lucifer's downfall, and whether it comes before or after humanity's conception, it's much more concise to treat them as two individual angels. Besides, Lucifer's motivation was to place his throne above God's, and effectively usurp him as the Most High, whilst Azazel's motivations appear to be much less grandiose, and whilst ambiguous in their own sense, in that it isn't clear what he gets out of teaching mankind how to wage war, they wish to achieve two very different things. One is an egomaniac who wants to be recognized as the superior being. The other is more like a psychopath who wants to puppeteer mankind into hurting themselves for no apparent reason. In his work, Rebellion in Heaven, scholar Paul D. Hansen proposes an alternative idea, that this rebellious psychotic angel once went by a slightly different name, Azazel, but that because of its similarity to Azazel, found in Leviticus 16, the latter came to be used instead. This then creates another problem. Is the 1 Enoch Azazel, or Azazel, the same as the Azazel that's described in Leviticus 16? To come to a conclusion, we'll need to understand the context of Leviticus 16. In this chapter of the Bible, we are told of the Day of Atonement, where the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, the sacred room in which God was worshipped, so as to make atonement for the sins of Israel. Here Aaron was told to offer sacrifices for himself, his people, and his household. 2 goats were chosen, one to be sacrificed to the Lord, and the other was to be sent away into the wilderness to an Azazel, symbolically carrying Israel's sins away from the camp. Who or what this Azazel was is still up for some debate. The footnotes of the ESV Bible sum it up quite neatly, telling us the meaning of Azazel is uncertain, possibly the name of a place or a demon, traditionally a scapegoat. Some interpretations would have us believe that the Azazel here was actually a cliff in the desert, and that one unlucky fellow in the ancient Jewish community was tasked with leading the goat containing all the sins of Israel off of this cliff, where it was plunged to its death and thus eradicated the Israelite sin. Leviticus 16 actually makes note of this person, telling us, "And he who lets the goat go to Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp." Other interpretations would have us believe that this person would lead the doomed goat to a demon named Azazel, who, for whatever reason, was residing in the desert to receive the goat into its clutches. If you were trying to align this with the 1 Enoch account, you could very well find a means to suggest that this was the same Azazel who had corrupted mankind, for after he is captured and brought to justice by God, he is shown to be cast into an opening in the desert, where he is blindfolded and bound by chains. There in the Enoch account, all sin is ascribed unto him, which coincides with the scriptural account of having a goat of sin, containing all the sins of Israel, being delivered to him. What he actually does with the goat, no one is really willing to hazard a guess, but if you were to view the whole thing symbolically, then there are quite a few interesting parallels here. The idea is summed up quite neatly by scholar Robert Helm in his paper Azazel in Early Jewish Tradition, where he tells us, regardless of which of these positions is favoured, it is apparent that the appearance of the name Azazel in the Enoch passage functions as a significant link with the Day of Atonement ritual described in Leviticus 16. It must be admitted that the demonic nature of Azazel is only implicit in Leviticus 16. However, 1 Enoch 8:1-3 depicts him in terms that are explicitly demonic. In fact, his characteristics approach the satanic in this passage, although he is never identified as Satan. Nevertheless, he is portrayed as a corrupter and tempter of humanity, and the main source of antediluvian impiety. Another place we see Azazel appear in this satanic light is in the 2nd century Apocalypse of Abraham, a Jewish apocalyptic text that expands on the life of Abraham. Whilst the term Azazel appears a few times in this text, one of the more interesting is where we see Azazel depicted not as a wicked angel or demon, at least at first, but merely as an unclean bird that lands on the carcass of an animal that Abraham has sacrificed. Naturally, this is no ordinary bird, but instead a talking bird who begins to argue with Abraham and perhaps attempt to deceive him. However, before Abraham can be baited, an angel appears to rebuke the bird, which you might say does give this Azazel a more demonic feel, given that an angel is required to scare it off, almost in the same way that the Archangel Raphael is required to defeat Azazel in 1 Enoch. The angel says, "Listen, fellow, be ashamed of yourself and let go. For you were not appointed to tempt all the righteous. Leave this man alone. You cannot beguile him, for he is your enemy, and the enemy of those who follow you, and dote on what you want. The garment that of old was set apart in the heavens for you is now set apart for him, and the corruption that was his has been transferred to you." It's then hard not to see this bird Azazel as a demonic creature, who, as is the case with most of the demonic brood, exists to tempt and deceive the righteous. What's more, the angel seems to imply that this Azazel had once been a part of heaven himself, perhaps as an angel, in that the garment that was in the heavens for it was now reserved for Abraham, he who was now much more worthy of it. In some Christian traditions, the serpent in the Garden of Eden is actually Satan in disguise, who utilizes this form to deceive Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge. However, in the Apocalypse of Abraham, when Abraham has a vision of Adam and Eve, it is not Satan he sees as the serpent, but in fact, Azazel. He tells us, "And they were standing under one of the trees in Eden, and the fruit on that tree looked like a bunch of dates. And behind the tree there stood what looked like a snake, with hands and feet like a man's, and wings on its shoulders, 3 on its right and 3 on its left. And they held in their hands a bunch from the tree, and they were eating. the two I had seen embracing. And I said, who are these who are embracing each other? Who is it who is between them? And what is the fruit they are eating, mighty Eternal One? And he said, this is the human world. This is Adam, and this is their desire upon the earth. This is Eve. And what is between them is the wicked path they started on towards perdition, namely Azazel. Once again, in this text, it is Azazel, not Satan, who assumes the role of tempter, appearing in the form of this winged snake to deceive Adam and Eve. Thus, it is that same wicked nature that we've come to expect of him in 1 Enoch, as well as in his previous appearance in the Apocalypse of Abraham, that we also see demonstrated here too. Azazel then is not merely some obscure name buried in the footnotes of Leviticus, nor is he just another demon shuffled into the overcrowded cabinet of ancient evil. Across these traditions, he becomes something far more unsettling, a rival explanation for corruption itself. In 1 Enoch, he is the angel who places blades into human hands and teaches mankind how to turn beauty, metal, and knowledge into instruments of violence and vanity. In Leviticus, he waits in the wilderness as the one to whom sin is symbolically sent, and in the Apocalypse of Abraham, he slithers into Eden itself, occupying the very role that later generations would instinctively hand to Satan. What you might find intriguing is that in spite of their shared disdain for mankind, and their obvious nemesis in God, neither entity seems to really collaborate. Milton's Paradise Lost portrays Azazel as a flag bearer for Satan, which kind of minimizes and dilutes the severity of his actions in the likes of 1 Enoch, or the latter part of the Apocalypse of Abraham, where he is shown to be the instigator of all sin. Yet outside of this text, Satan and Azazel don't seem to ever acknowledge each other, which is perhaps just as well, because the two of them together might be more than anyone might be prepared to handle. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.